Hey there, this is Peter. Welcome to another Take a Break with Valley CAD. Today's video, what we're going to be talking about are global variables and equations. This is a really awesome set of features or functions that we can do in SOLIDWORKS to help speed up our modeling process. So go get that favorite cup of coffee or tea, and let's go hop on into SOLIDWORKS to learn something new about working with equations. I'll see you over there. Hey there, welcome to SOLIDWORKS. So you got a simple cube here, and as we look at this guy, I'll just use my rollback bar to show you how I made it. So I started on my top plane here, and I did simple dimensions here where I did 15 inches, 7 inches, and then 6 inches tall. Then I came in and shelled out the top part, 1/2 inch thick all the way around. And then I did an inside fillet that is at 1/4 inch radius, and then I did an outside radius that is at 3/4 inch radius. All right. So some of you might be going, well, Peter, why didn't you do the fillet before you did the shell? Yes, that's how I would normally do this part, but I am showing this in regards to making some global variables and equations. So in case you did not do your fillet after the fact of a shell, or sorry, before you did the shell, this might be also a really useful fix for you as well. So equations, this is where you could come in and really speed up your modeling process. And for instance, let's say we wanted to come in and say, hey, I always need my inside radius to always be 1/2 of my wall thickness. Or maybe I need the outside to always be 1.5 times larger than my wall thickness. Or maybe I need it to where my 7 inch dimension here needs to always be 1/2 of that 15 inch dimension that currently is that dimension. And let's say you need to make a design change and you want to make all those other parameters update like that. Well, this is where equations and global variables comes into play. All right, so where is this equations at? Well, if you look in the left side of my screen here, I have a folder called equations. Now, if you don't see this on your system now, it's because you need to make it so it's visible. So what we're gonna do is come up to our sprocket here, and by clicking on the options, you'll come down under System Options, you will come down to Feature Manager. Under Feature Manager, you'll see that there's a selection of icons here. These are all your hide, show, tree items. So these are the items that are visible or hidden in your design tree. And you'll see here towards the right is equations. It's set as shown, so that's why it's always visible on my system. I could also set it up to be automatic, meaning that it's hidden until I activate equations, or I could say always hide it. So you can do that with all these different types of folders that live in your Feature Manager design tree. Cool, so I'm gonna leave it so it's shown just for this video alone. All right, so then how do you activate equations? You simply come over to that equations folder and you right click on it and you say manage equations from there. From here, this is where you control your global variables, features, and equations. So we're gonna be looking at global variables first. Global variables is where you come in and you give it a name, and then under the name, after the fact of that, you have value or equation. The value is just a number. It's not inches, it's not degrees, it's not millimeters, it's just a simple number there. So for instance, we'll come in and we'll call this one OL, and an OL is gonna stand for overall length. So in this regard, I'm gonna say be 15 numbers or 15 digits, the number 15. And under my comments, and I'm just pushing tab, by the way, to switch between those cells. So under my comments, I could say overall length, and coming in and being able to add comments is not a necessity. It is a good thing to do though. So by doing this, if I'm sharing this file with other SOLIDWORKS users and they're like, what the heck does OL stand for? They can look under the comments and see, oh, that stands for overall length. Great. Okay. Now from there, we can push tab and I'll take you down to your next level of a global variable. And you know what? I'll create one here called WT. Now, WT is gonna stand for my wall thickness. Now, one thing to note, when you're making global variables, you cannot, and I repeat, do not create a global variable called thickness. The reason is because when SOLIDWORKS uses the sheet metal features, it actually automatically creates a global variable for you called thickness. So that's why it's a very good practice. Do not use the term thickness when you're making a global variable. So in this scenario, we'll make so it's 0.5. You know what? Let's make it fun. Let's make it 0.375. Yeah, it's a little more fun than half of an inch, right? And so in that regard, we can say wall thickness, like so. Perfect. So I made two global variables. These global variables are going to be used to control my entire part for me. So that way, all I have to do is update two variables, and it'll automatically scale or resize my entire part. Get ready for this. So as we look a little bit further down, you have features. The features section is for if-then statements. And by the way, like Excel, if-then statements. And so the features are more for suppress and unsuppress. So if I say, if this part is this wide, I want you to unsuppress the hole here. But I want you to suppress the hole that's too close to the edge here. But if I make it this wide, now it'll say, hey, we can add that first hole and the second hole. So that's where you have if-then statements. Then underneath that, you have equations. Equations is where you come in and you say, hey, I want 2 plus 2 to equal 4. Now, let me pull up a little notepad here so we can kind of look at this a little bit more. So as I said 2 plus 2 equals 4. All right, so as we look at the anatomy of an equation here, on the left side of your equal sign here, this is called your independent. And everything on the right side is your dependent. So what that's saying here is with my independent side, if I change that 2 to a 3, this does not equal 4 anymore. This is being driven by these two factors that are on the left side of that equal sign. This will now become 5. Well, when you're working with SOLIDWORKS equations, it's flipped. Meaning this, you put your dependent on the left side of your equal symbol, and you put the independent on the right side. So I'll say 5 equals 3 plus 2, or 2 plus 3, doesn't really matter in this scenario. But that's how SOLIDWORKS works with the equation manager. Okay, and by the way, Excel works in the same way. So what goes underneath this cell that's right underneath the word equations? This is typically where a dimension will live. So if I come back in here, and let's say I double click on this outside face so I can see my dimensions. Under my equations, I could say, hey, I want that 15, which is actually called D2, so dimension 2 at sketch 1. After clicking on it, and by the way, this is dependent that I just filled in there, that D2 at sketch 1, I now need to tell it the independent side. What do I want this dimension to equal? Imagine this line that's coming down the center between equations and value equation is your equal symbol. So in this scenario, I want to make it to where this 15 is going to equal my overall length. Okay, so I'm going to come in and I'll say global variables, and I want it to be OL. From there, I say okay to that. After I say okay to this, you will see something kind of cool. As I double click on this here, you'll see that my 15 is there, and it has this little red E looking thing on it. By the way, extra brownie points for you. If you know what that little E symbol is, chat it to us in the comments down below. What is that thing called? In SOLIDWORKS, this is just the designator say, hey, this dimension is being driven by an equation. All right, so as we come back into this, I want to bring up my equations folder again, or manager, I should say. As we look at this here, we say, hey, D2 at sketch 1 equals OL. Awesome. I'm going to come down here to say automatically rebuild. What this does is it makes it to where if I change any values on here, let's say I change that 15 to a 16. And I say cool to that, you know, and I double click on here. Okay, so it still says 15 on it. So if I click off on the cell, you'll see that my OL now equals 16. Awesome, right? And so with that, you can also see my graphics area. It says 16 now. Let's try this out again. Let's make it so it's 17, and I'll push tab. You'll see that, hey, D2 at sketch 1 equals OL. OL equals 17. That makes it to where my evaluates to equals 17 as well. Pretty cool, huh? So now we also need to come in and make my wall thickness equal to my WT there. So if I come in, double click on the inside face here, you'll see that 1/2 inch. Well, I want to make it to where that 1/2 inch lives in this cell here, and I'll make this equal to WT like so, and then push tab. Done. So now as we look at this, and I say okay to that, and I'll just get out of the manager there, you'll see that, hey, my wall thickness is now 3/8 of an inch. But remember how I was saying, hey, I want to make it to where my inside radius is always half the value of my wall thickness, and I want to make the outside radius always equal 1.5 times my shell thickness or my wall thickness there? Well, this is where equations come into play. Here's one way we could go about it. I could come back into my equations folder, say manage equations. I can say, hey, I want to make this here, this inside value, that 1/4 inch, to always equal wall thickness times 0.5 or divide by 2. And we push tab on that. You'll see here, it automatically updated that because that is the value of half of my wall thickness. So that's one way to come in and make easy equations. Here's the other way I like to do it. I like utilizing my modify box. So if I double click on this outside fillet, you'll see that 3/4 inch radius. Double click on the 3/4 inch radius there. If I have my modify box, which is this guy here, we call it a modify box because it's a box and it says modify on it. If I push the equal symbol on there, that automatically activates equation mode for me. So I can say, hey, I want to make this equal wall thickness times 1.5. And then from there, say okay to that. You'll see that this now is 0.5625. Do a Control Q to rebuild it. And now you'll see that my value is automatically updated. So that way my fillets here look consistent as well. All right, so now let's come in for our last one. Let's say I want to make it to where this 7 always equals 3/4 of that value there. So I'll say that this here equals this times 0.75. Say okay to that. So it's going to equal 12.75. Watch this, Control Q, updated. Pretty sweet, huh? And then maybe I want to add even more saying, hey, I want to make sure that this always equals this times 0.5, meaning I always want it half the height of that. From there, Control Q, just got a little bit taller. So now let's try this out. If I come into my equations folder here and say manage equations, changes 15 or 17 to 28. Update, all these values update for me. And also my wall thickness. Let's say I want to make it go from 3/8 of an inch, make it so it's 3/4 of an inch, not 75, but 3/4. Push tab on there. All this value here has been updated for me as well. So that's coming in and playing with global variables and equations on an easy scale there. You could get so complicated with this stuff. It is amazing. So hopefully you enjoyed your cup of coffee as you got a little scratch at the surface of working with equations and global variables. I hope you can find some really awesome techniques with it. Have a great rest of the day and make sure you learn something new.